Testing 1, 2. Okay. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out here on a sort of cold but not horrible winter night. We're the Bogart Salon, and this is the first in hopefully a long series of critical discussions about contemporary culture, art, everything. The very first idea, though, when we opened back in September, was the very first issue we had to figure out was what were we doing here. So early on we decided the first topic should be Bushwick itself. And in doing that, it's extremely problematic because Bushwick is so many things. First of all, it's a community of people who've been here 30, 40, 50 years. There's another community of early adapter galleries, some of whom are here, some aren't. The third part is the part we're kind of trying to figure out tonight, and that is this moment, and they occur periodically when history and geography all seem to come together. And I think we understand we're in this sort of moment when this scene, Bushwick, is emerging. Something's happening. We're not sure what it will be. That's part of the panel discussion tonight. But I think we have to understand one thing. When we talk about who belongs in a certain place, we always have to understand that New York is a city built on people who come and remove other people. So New York's basic genetic imprint is a kind of a layering, a sort of a wedding cake. So some people have said, well, why are some people here but others aren't? And the answer is, there is no right mix. There's only people who we asked, people who responded, and if this goes well, and we anticipate it will, there'll be a part 2 and 3. So hopefully there'll be other moments when we can discuss. But tonight we have a very distinguished panel, and I'd like to take a minute to introduce each. But before I do that, I need to do one thing, and a brief, very brief, to the owner of the building, Ted Hovivian, who's been here for close to 30 years. And Ted's lovely wife, Marianne. And your daughter, who is both a daughter and aide-de-camp. So she functions. Now, Marianne also grew up nearby. So when people talk about how long have you been here, you don't want to get in that discussion. And long ago, Ted had this crazy idea, which verged on either genius or absurdity, that he wanted to convert the building to an art building, for reasons that are still unclear to me. But this night begins the moment when hopefully Ted's vision of what the building and the whole area could be comes to partial fruition. So to some degree it's his vision tonight as well. So let me get right to the panel itself. The host tonight is somebody who I think without him this panel couldn't have been done, because Hrag Vartanian, founder, editor-in-chief of Hyperallergic art blog, is a person who performs many different roles tonight. One is a person who's understood the Bushwick meme, another person who is both observant and somewhat critical of it. So he's not here as a cheerleader. He's actually here to interrogate the issue of confronting Bushwick. And on the panel, we try to build a panel that represents a mix of people who've been here either for a short time or are somewhat longer members. I'll start from left to right here. Thomas Burr Dodd is the owner, founder of Brooklyn Fireproof on Ingraham Street. Thomas has done something which I think is brilliant, and he captured it early on. He created a building which is home to artists, but is also a restaurant, a jazz club, and on and on. And he has sound studios. He's filming the Food Network here. So in Thomas's case, he's an artist, a business person, entrepreneur, and more importantly, the fourth part, he's a father with a child and a marriage that is located near here. So he's both fearful that his success will displace himself.
Well said.
To his left, your right, Carolina A. Miranda, writer for WNYC and Artnews, has written a very interesting article on Bushwick. I'm sure as both a professional writer and an observer as a local resident as well, near local. She obviously has 2 points of view as well. One is a critical art writer, one is a resident. To her left, Deborah Brown. Deborah is the owner, director of Storefront Gallery, and an artist as well, and she too is a resident, not so far from here, so that again, some of the panelists both act as residents and critical thinkers. So we'll have two different insights into their thoughts. And to the far right here and to Deb's left is Marco Antonini. Marco is the director of Nurture Art, which is the, if I'm correct, the second oldest not-for-profit in Brooklyn. I'll say it if anything. Momenta and Nurture are 1A and B in terms of Brooklyn not-for-profits. And Marco's the director, and they are located in the first or the basement, and you would enter to the door to the right as you come into our door. So the building itself is full of people who are here tonight, some of whom I could name, but Momenta, Agape, Studio 10, our newest gallerist, Slag Gallery. So there's really a lot of people here who are both part of the building and interested to hearing Hrag's point of view on the Bushwick scene itself. So with that, I will turn the mic over to Hrag Vartanian. Let's have a big round of applause for Hrag.
When we first moved in at that time, I mean, it was kind of, you know, you thought, oh yeah, Bushwick will be next, and everyone used to laugh at you, and you know, and see what is really going to be next. And then you start seeing things happen and things change. And you know, to the point where we get to an event like this, where we have so many people here that are actually interested in the neighborhood and what it actually means in terms of an art neighborhood. What's coming next? What are the needs? What is the present situation we're facing? So I wanted to start with Carolina because her article in Artnews actually comes out next week. And it is an article that she was able to speak to a number of people about the history of the neighborhood and the current situation and the art community that's developing here. Carolina has been a resident for how long?
Going on 7 years.
7 years in the neighborhood, so she knows the neighborhood quite well. She's a blogger, she's an art critic, she writes other things as well, so she has a different perspective. So I wanted to start with you and get your perspective of what you discovered doing the research for your article.
Hi. Well, just so you guys know, I've been living in New York for almost 19 years and have been through several neighborhoods, so I bring that experience as well. And I'm actually second generation Brooklyn. My dad immigrated to the United States through Brooklyn and spent several years here, so I have some real ties to this crazy place. I think one of the things, and this art news story is making me very nervous. Talking about it in front of this room full of people. Thank God it's not out yet. I think one of the things that came up, because I talked to a lot of people who started galleries recently, a lot of people who've been living in the neighborhood since the 1990s, people who've been in the neighborhood since the 1970s, not necessarily artists. And in terms of what's happening artistically, I think one of the things that came up with a lot of folks that had been through the East Village and Williamsburg scene of the 1970s and 80s is certainly the light speed nature of what has happened in Bushwick. I mean, I've been here for going on 7 years this spring, and the change in that time, I think for anyone who's been here that time or longer, is pretty flabbergasting. I mean, I feel like there's a new gallery that I haven't heard about popping up every week. For a while it seemed that there was a new loft building that was opening up to studios every week. So there's definitely been a sense of sort of hyper speed about it. One of the artists I interviewed was Fred Tomaselli, and he was in Williamsburg in the 1980s. And he talked a little bit about how part of what I think, you know, artists like him miss a little bit in terms of letting culture congeal. But he said back in Williamsburg, you know, back in the day, there was no internet. You didn't know where the cool spots were. You didn't know where people were living. You found out about panels and concerts and performances from other people you knew. You saw someone with a weird haircut at the deli, and you started talking to them. Seriously, Fred said he made amazing long-term friends from people he met at a deli, and he was like, oh, there's a girl with pink hair in my Italian neighborhood. I'm going to go talk to her. So there was this sense of things congealing, whereas now things are moving at hyper speed. Whether that's bad or that's good, I don't think that's a judgment. It's just how things are moving. It's also a very professionalized scene. I get this sense from having done research on sort of what the 10th Street Gallery scene was like in the 1940s and what Soho was like in the 70s and later East Village and Williamsburg. You know, this is coming at a time when, like for example, in 1960, there were 72 MFA programs in the United States. Today there's 900, or over 900. So this is an industry. This is not the art world. This is the art industry. And it's professionalized and it's academic. And I think part of what we're seeing in both Bushwick and what we've seen for the last few years and are now going to start to see a transition with the advent of Learning Augustine is basically this was where the entry-level workers of the art industry came to live for a long time simply because it was affordable, it was convenient, it offered great proximity to Williamsburg, to the East Village, and to a whole number of other places. And so you end up having a place with a critical mass that previous New York art scenes took years, decades sometimes, to build and maybe never even reached this point. I mean, I don't think Williamsburg in 1984 had this many art scenes. I mean, that's a pure guess, but. And I think that's all I have to say about that. So I will pass it back.
Now, when you're speaking to the non-art people, what were some of the impressions they had on this change?
I mean, there's two schools, definitely. You have very long-time folk who've been here since the 1970s and own property, and you know, they're happy to see crime go down. They're happy to see galleries open up. They're happy that there are, you know, new restaurants and places to go in the neighborhood because it means good things for them and for the community that they've invested so much time in. At the same time, there is a tension because a lot of the places that do open up are expensive or geared at a certain audience or, you know, don't even hire locally. I mean, how many times have we been at brand new restaurants in the Bushwick area where, like, not even the people who work there look like, you know, they might be Latino. So there is a great deal of tension that goes along with that too. I mean, there's this, it's a great deal of ambivalence. And I think for the folks that own property and that have been around since the 70s, especially since the blackout, since before the blackout, this is a good thing. For folks that arrived at around that time or later, and who maybe don't own property, who rent, who came here to live because the cost of living was cheap, the supermarkets were cheap, the restaurants were cheap. It's a little scary to see that change. You know, and I see that with like my block, where it's like a lot of the people there are very excited to not be dealing with the crime issue, but every time a moving truck rolls up, they're like, ay, lo blanquito, lo blanquito, you know? Just like, it's like the price, it's like the little white ones are arriving, and they're like, and the price of chicken is going to go up at the supermarket because of this. And so it's like there's an association with that, and I'll probably stop there because I really don't want to be the first one to say the G word.
And I wanted to continue with you, Thomas, because you have a very unique space in the neighborhood, and you've actually been part of a number of scenes. And you had mentioned you also have connections with some of your neighbors that are non-arts related. And I want you to talk a little bit about how that evolved and when you first decided to move here. And you have, I think you said 64,000 square feet?
185,000.
185,000 square feet in the neighborhood. So you obviously...
That's a bit crass.
I think it gives a sense of the scale.
It's rented. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I've been here for about 9 years, and originally I had opened Brooklyn Fireproof as an art gallery in Williamsburg, actually, and I was trying to, with my wife, who's somewhere in the back, I hope, she's sort of missing, but to try to create an alternative space to show art that wasn't really so much based on the usual model of sales, because we knew we weren't going to get them in Williamsburg. Williamsburg, even though we crossed our fingers. So when I came out here, I actually used to come here to party, quite frankly. There were great spaces that we would just go and dance and have crazy times, and so stumble out at 7 o'clock in the morning, like, how do we get home? Like, where are we? So there's been a lot of artists in this neighborhood for quite some time, and it's it was also a hush hush, and there was just a lot of creativity and things going on, as with Williamsburg as well. So it's actually been here for quite a while. As far as the changes, one of the things that I experience quite a bit with all the space that I've developed is I am sort of constantly, I hate to use a word, but I'll use it anyways, harassed by city inspectors and such, because there's people around that don't want to see this happen. There's organizations that want to keep a place for cement to be manufactured, for garbage to be dropped off. I mean, Bushwick, you may not know it, but a lot of the garbage from Manhattan and stuff ends up here. I keep telling the health inspectors when they give me a $300 fine for a fly, I'm like, do you know where you are? Like, this is Bushwick, there's garbage. So we're sitting in this beautiful room with a chandelier, but the reality is this neighborhood has serviced Manhattan, and a lot of people wanted to retain that and keep the prices down and such. I think we obviously know which way it's going. One of my buildings is next to the Doe Fund, and I didn't know much about it's Ready, Willing, and Able. I'm sure you all see their blue coats, and they're usually sweeping up the streets, but they do a lot more than just that. They've been an amazing neighbor, actually, and they're doing great stuff. I actually do hire from there occasionally. I was concerned when I was first looking, the building, the biggest building that we have, I took just one floor, and it was vacant. The landlord didn't know what to do with it, and I'm like, I'll take it, I'll take the whole floor. And it was a knitting mill, which a lot of this area was knitting mills as well. I was concerned about the Doe Fund and stuff like that, and whether or not artists would come out to rent space, and what am I, what's going to happen here? But it's worked out really well. I think a lot of the community is supportive because of the crime. I mean, some of the other people that were here for so long were saying, I mean, there was major amounts of prostitution, drugs. I used to pick up needles all the time in front of some of our buildings and stuff like that. So it was intense, and I think people have welcomed the change. I don't know how people are going to feel about that as it it's sort of picking up this pace. I don't think we've made it through a recession, hopefully, so I don't really see it going backwards at this point. But I think we need to be sensitive to what's here and offer something for the community. And there's not a lot of schools, there's not a lot of daycare even, and so maybe that's something that we need to sort of invest in and help grow, so that we add value to the community.
I'll continue with you, because you've, how long have you been in this neighborhood?
Since 2006.
2006. And I mean, I think Carolina characterized it right in terms of the lightning speed that things are happening in this neighborhood. I think it's very, well, I'm going to ask you, do you agree? And how did you arrive in this neighborhood, and how have you seen it develop? And what are your characterizations of it?
I came to Bushwick by complete accident in 2006, and 3 weeks later owned a vacant factory on Stockholm Street at the DeKalb stop. It was an intuition that I had that this area was going to be, I think, what it's becoming, and I really wanted to be a part of it. I needed a workspace, and this building was really perfect. But 6 years ago or 7 years ago, I think Bushwick looked like this was not a foregone conclusion. I remember feeling distinctly that I was the only person of my race, my age, walking around. There were young white kids, but certainly nobody of my generation walking around. I felt very much like I was sticking out, like a sore thumb. So I think it's actually continued at a pretty slow pace until the last 6 months. I think the biggest things that have happened in Bushwick that have accounted for this sense of overnight transformation have happened very recently. And they're, like anything else, this stuff has been going on below the surface. And the most outward manifestations of it are only clear right at the end. And so I think while we had things like the Northeast Kingdom and Bushwick Open Studios, in its earliest stages, the most obvious transformations of Bushwick are things like Roberta's being lionized as one of the best restaurants in America by the New York Times. I mean, who would have ever seen that? Or this building, which I think is the outward manifestation of this tremendous artist community, and now the not-for-profits want to be here. Now their commercial galleries are here for the first time. That's really only happened within the last few months, but things were working up to it. So I would just like to give a little bit of a personal history because for me, I think I represent a lot of different things that you can do in Bushwick. Let's say that, and why it's been such a great community, I think, for artists. You can really do anything here. I mean, I came here, I didn't know anybody, and I've started an art gallery. I have my painting studio in my building, which is a separate building from the one I rent as the gallery. I'm on the community board, which I think is a really interesting experience for somebody of my generation and my race. It's a 50-person board. I think there are only a few other white people on the board, 2 or 3. It's a really interesting way to learn who's the leaders of Bushwick, who've led Bushwick through the worst years, through its darkest hours. You really get a totally different perspective on who's in this community by going and being with reverends and educators and people who work in the anti-poverty community.
So what are some of the things you're hearing from them in terms
I heard nothing about this community in the community board until the last few months. And now it's all anxiety and fear. So I think they couldn't have been cared less about you or me. I have a business in Bushwick. My husband has yoga braces and orthodontic clinics. So we treat many of the members of this community who are people without many economic resources. So I feel like I have a pretty good window on that community, and I've never heard in the community board anyone express much of an interest in the art community until recently as a voice that expresses fear and anxiety about what changes this will bring. Now I think that community is split a little bit, as Carolina alluded to, because some people own their homes here and they stand to realize a much bigger gain than they might have had Bushwick continued as it had been in the 70s. But for the most part, people here, and there are many different new people here. It's not just Dominicans and Puerto Ricans who've lived here for 30 or 40 years, like all the individuals on my block. There's families who all know each other and are very involved in each other's lives. It's new immigrants from Latin America and Central America, many of whom are undocumented. How those two communities get along, I really don't know. I mean, I intersect with my Dominican and Puerto Rican neighbors and do things with kids on my block and involved in bettering their lives in different ways. But, and they've bettered my life too, I would say. But I mean, Bushwick is a lot more complicated a place than really we know, I think, as artists and people who don't intersect with these other communities. They have more going on than we know.
Well, was there a certain
numbers, boots on the ground. There's seen many more individuals from our community. More, you can see. It used to be you would walk around Bushwick 6 years ago. We speak of this lightning transformation. You would know everybody on the street, and you would know them by sight because there were just very few people, really, I think, from the art community out here in visible numbers. But now, I mean, way past the DeKalb stop into deepest Bushwick and in Ridgewood, there are many more communities like ours. And I think the community board members see, they don't like the idea that they characterize our establishments as gyms, bars, galleries. It's not for our people. And you hear language like that, not for our community.
Community board, like where does it go to?
Bushwick Avenue, Evergreen Cemetery, Cypress, and Flushing. That's Bushwick, Community Board 4. So it's 110,000 people. Community Board is composed of 50 people appointed by the borough president or the council people who represent it. And it really represents the old Bushwick. And when I mean old Bushwick, I don't mean the people who had galleries here before they opened in this building. I mean the people who've lived here, as Carolina was saying, 30, 40 years. Bushwick used to be Italian and German.
Right.
Now it's very much Latino. It's about 65% Latino and 30% black, 1% white. So it's, those are the power structures of Bushwick, and they're reflected in the community board.